So, good evening everyone, and thank you for coming to what promises to be a very stimulating discussion. The panelists had dinner together just an hour ago, and right away that could have been the program that we're doing, and hopefully we can bring some of that. I would like to especially thank the folks at Hebrew College, Brian Mayer, head of the School of Jewish Music, and Sharon Annisfeld-Cohen, the president, for co-sponsoring this, as well as the Zamir Choral of Boston Alumni Association, Alan Tepero, who's here. Special thanks also to Barb Gaffin and Larry Sandberg for all of their work in helping this get together. Let's give them all. And tonight's program is being video recorded and will be posted eventually on the Zamir Choral of Boston website for the benefit of those who could not attend this evening's program. So the plan for this evening is we're going to have a discussion among the panelists exploring issues related to ethnic identity, concert programming, and belonging to a chorus. We will discuss the challenges as well as the benefits for a chorus that specializes in music from a single ethnic tradition, as well as my colleagues who have experience with choruses that represent a variety of ethnic traditions. We hope this will be a freewheeling discussion on these topics, and at around 9 o'clock or so, we will open this up to your questions and comments. So, right off, I would like to introduce the members of our panel. We will go in alphabetical order, and each person will grab their microphone and say a few things about what it is they do. Richard Barrett is first.
Good evening. Thank you very much to Josh for inviting me to participate in this. It's a joy to be here. Josh and I worked together on a cantillation symposium a couple of years ago, and it's wonderful to have a chance to participate in something that he's doing again. I wear a few different hats that are relevant to the subject area tonight. First and foremost, I'm the cantor and choir director at Dormition of the Virgin Mary Greek Orthodox Church in Somerville, Massachusetts. And then my day job is I am the executive director of a nonprofit called Ages Initiatives, which specializes in producing and distributing electronically bilingual service texts in Greek and English, as well as musical scores for the use of Greek Orthodox parishes in the United States as well as throughout the world. And then I also am the artistic director of an organization called the St. John of Damascus Society, which seeks to promote to the general public all of the different musics that fall under the umbrella of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, not just Greek Orthodox music, but also Russian Orthodox, the music of Georgia, Bulgaria, and so on. So I'm very pleased to be here tonight.
Thank you, Richard. Andre de Quadros.
Is this working? It is. I want to, at the risk of repeating what Richard said, to thank Josh for organizing this. I think Josh is not only an incredible musician and a great authority in such rich traditions of multiple traditions of Jewish musics, but he's also a role model for the best of our profession, bringing people together, inclusive, and a humane architect for choral music. So thank you very much, Josh, for doing this wonderful work. So just to an introduction for myself, I direct a Boston-based chamber choir, Voices 21C. I'm a professor of music at Boston University, but I also direct some other choirs, Manado State University Choir from Indonesia, the Muslim Choral Ensemble in Sri Lanka, and that was, I gave a concert there actually just before the bombing took place. The Israeli-Palestinian ensemble, international choir called Common Ground Voices, based in Jerusalem. Another project choir called Common Ground Voices La Frontera, which is a mixed Mexican-American choir on the Mexican-American border. And an uniformed choir, which I co-direct which will have its first residency in Inner Mongolia at the end of next month, an 18-country collaboration. I've been teaching in prisons in Boston for the last 7 years, men's, women's prisons and juvenile detention, and done a lot of work in juvenile detention and prisons in different parts of the world. I've also been working with refugees and asylum seekers in different places as well. Thank you very much.
He's a busy man. Good. Father Caranos is not able to be with us this evening. He was called away, unfortunately, for a funeral at the last minute, but he is a colleague of Richard's, and so he will represent the Greek Orthodox tradition. Carol Martin.
Good evening. I'm also very honored to be here, and thanks to Josh for putting this together. I'm the director of Kolenu, Boston's Jewish Community Chorus, that is now in its 17th year and has a roster of about 80 people from around the Boston area. I came to Jewish music from a very traditional Western musical education, so I was the founding director of Kolenu, but that was actually someone else's idea. Scott Kenter, Rav Hazan, Scott so-called. He's got so many titles, I can't keep up with him. But it was certainly no small thanks to the Zamir Choral Boston and Josh Jacobson himself that Kolenu exists, and this is as good a moment as any to acknowledge that.
Great. Thank you, Carol. So I'm still Josh Jacobson, and I'm the conductor of the Zamir Choral of Boston, specializing in musics from the Jewish traditions, now in our 50th season. And just a year ago retired after 45 years of teaching and conducting at Northeastern University, and I also teach here in the cantorial program. And my wonderful colleague to my left is Nick Page.
Congratulations on 50 years. I direct the Mystic Chorale, celebrating 29 years. And I'll tell you later about a concert we have this weekend. It's going to be amazing. I got my start in a singing family. We sang every night, every Saturday night. We had Franks and Beans, and then we sang. We harmonized in many ways. And my parents, they introduced me to the music of Miriam Makeba, and I listened to Theodore Brickell more than I did the Beatles. So I fell in love with Jewish music early on. Anyway, I ended up in Chicago with Chicago Children's Choir, working with Max Janowski, and working with great gospel musicians like Keith Hampton there in Chicago, learning gospel the old way by looking over someone's shoulder going, how did you do that? And I founded the Mystic Chorale 29 years ago. I also do song leading, and I'm a composer, and I'm very proud to have a piece coming up on the June 4th concert, Anu Sharim, We Sing. I'm really looking forward to hearing that.
Thank you, Nick. We are also looking forward to performing. Traveling the furthest distance for this event is Jose Rivera, and please.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Boston, and I'm amazed. I've been walking all day, just looking at everything that Boston has, and I can't get enough. It's a pleasure to be here because I do lots of things, like all of us here. I work at the University of North Carolina, the director of Pembroke Singers. I'm also the coordinator for music education at that university. That university is historically a Lumbee Indian university. They're not federally recognized, but there's a lot of Lumbees who live in that area still, and we teach them. I also am the director of music at a Presbyterian church in North Carolina. I've been doing this for about 30 years. And I also just had the pleasure of completing my last year as the American Choral Director Association ethnic, multicultural music, and that is for repertoire and standards and resources. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I can't wait to engage in the incredible conversations that we started upstairs, and I know that we will continue here. But thank you.
And we thank you, Jose, for also representing the National Organization of American Choral Directors Association. On the blue microphone is a man we had a pleasure of doing a joint concert with a few months ago, Brother Dennis Slaughter.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It is a delight and pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to be invited with such an august group as this. And as we were just upstairs talking, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I've really got to figure out what I can bring to this, because I want to take more away than I'm giving. But I'm really most excited that you're here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. You found this to be engaging enough that you would come? That's great. So it gives me hope as I continue to do choral directing, that somebody wants to hear somebody talk about choral directing. I am the artistic director of the Boston Pops Gospel Choir, and I am the founder of the Boston Community Choir, and I am also the minister of music at Parkway United Methodist Church in Milton, Massachusetts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brother Dennis. And on the red microphone, Lynn Torgov.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I am the artistic director and the founder of Kol Arev, which is the chamber choir here at Hebrew College. And we serve as an ambassador of Hebrew College and perform all over the greater Boston area, including many Jewish organizations and Jewish music concerts, but also many interfaith collaborations with organizations from South Africa as well as around the block. I come here not as a conductor. The conductor of Kol Arev is the very wondrous Amy Lieberman, who is our music director and conductor, and couldn't be here tonight because she's at a rehearsal. I have sung in many choirs, however, and have a lot to do. Amy and I work on the programming for Kol Arev together. I've been a member of the Episcopal Emmanuel Church Choir for many years, where we sang a Bach cantata every Sunday morning. I'm also cantor at another Emmanuel, which is Temple Emmanuel in Marblehead. I have sung with the cantata singers for many years, a variety of different repertoires. I'm the Hebrew language and Jewish cultural coach for the Tanglewood Festival Chorus and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Last year being the big Bernstein year, they needed my services a lot more than they do this year. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cantor Torgov.
I'm sorry. I am a cantor. I was ordained here at Hebrew College, and I'm on the faculty here as the head of vocal arts. Thank you, Josh.
Glad I reminded you. So we have so much to talk about. I don't know exactly where to begin, but let's start off with repertoire. I think that was your idea also. Carol, some of us specialize in one area of repertoire, and some of us have a more diverse view. How do we define our repertoire? How do we define the limits of what we do? And do we ever bring in music that is outside of those lines? Where do we find that repertoire? And how do we feel about other choruses performing that repertoire? And one more thing to throw out, to what extent is the ethnic material, if I can use that word ethnic, decontextualized, assimilated, acculturated by being arranged for the Western, air quotes, Western chorus and that context of concert music? So hopefully we can get rid of our stage front and our manners and start to interrupt each other with some good ideas. Carol, you want to start?
Of course I do. So I won't answer every question that you just put there. I think what I would want to just mention about Kolenu, first of all, Kolenu was formed to be a chorus available to anyone in the Boston area or anyone who wants to come, no matter where they come from, or their background, anyone who's interested in singing Jewish choral music. So the mission of the group is a very open one, and it's one of the most beautiful things. It's a non-audition group, and it functions to bring people along. For me, personally, coming to Jewish music, I was mentioning that I come from a pretty standard Western background, and though I am Jewish, I really knew nothing about Jewish music, and it was upon becoming a conductor, when I knew I would be the one choosing the music, that I felt like it was important to look for something outside the standard that was already being done. I love all the traditional canon, but I thought, do we really need another Schubert, Mass and G? They're beautiful, I love it, but I wanted to find something different. So the path to Jewish music, so I say that just to mention that I came from what felt like an outside place to this repertoire. So I think one of the things that's interesting for me personally, and one of the ways that I go about choosing music, is kind of from an inside and an outside. To hear something that sounds to me like, this sounds Jewish, whatever that means. I can definitely identify that, and in a way I feel like it exists in me in some cellular level that I can't really explain because I didn't grow up with it around me. But what interests me is both that and then also the fact that in my learning about Jewish music and many musics, the fact that there's no pure music out there. And well, pure, say for instance, purely Jewish music, that I don't think that there is anyone who could say this music comes only from a Jewish place and no other influence. And to me that's a very interesting fact, that music of all things is, and musicians are the people who steal the most in the most wonderful way. And I think that's a great thing. And so for me, I think what I'm trying to get at in perhaps too long-winded a way is the fact that there is something that, there is a Jewish repertoire. I don't want to say that that's not the case, but as someone pointed out earlier, there are many Jewish musics. But I'm also very interested in making that definition as wide as it can possibly be. And so for instance, it interests me to find something that may not be obviously a Jewish piece, but find the connection between the musics and the influence on one another, and why might this be a Jewish piece? So I guess I'm trying to get at something in preparation for this night. I've been thinking about the idea of a repertoire, an ethnic repertoire, such as it is, and also the porousness of our traditions and the way that we borrow and steal and appropriate, misappropriate sometimes. I'll throw that out as an opening salvo.
Yeah, I like to say this: music cannot be Jewish. People can be Jewish. Music cannot be Jewish. And who's the scholar that says music should not be a noun but a verb? I don't know if you remember who that was. Yes?
I'm writing a book about it.
All right, go, Nick. Take the orange microphone.
Yellow. Let's have a hand for Larry back there, please. We got to thank repertoire. I am very proud to have written a piece for a Jewish chorus for their 50th wedding anniversary. Me as a wazoo, which is a white Anglo-Saxon Unitarian Universalist. And so
You're up the wazoo.
I'm up the wazoo. I'm always looking for the universal. I'm looking for the universal. And the universal for me is something I heard Andre say in Kansas City recently, where he began his talk by talking about the power of choral singing, and which is the power of the heart. The power of the heart. Ellen Dissanayake is a behavioral psychologist who studies the evolution of human expression. And she says singing started as a mother-child dialogue. And so it's that that first song you ever sung. That for me is what I'm looking for. So my concerts this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, Mystic Choral at Cary Hall in Lexington, 150 singers. I wrote down the kind of music we're doing. Folk, blues, swing, baroque, a Serbian folk song in bluegrass, Dixieland blues, South African, a Yiddish song you'd love, Yidel Beaten Fiedel, but not the Monty Python version. And a song called Venceremos from Sweet Honey in the Rock. And what's the universal in all of it is the heart. And I have to tell my Irish story. This has to do with appropriation, misappropriation, whatever the word is, and I get completely confused, and I'm supposed to be an expert on multicultural. I programmed 3 Irish songs with the Mystic Choral years ago. One was a children's song, one was a sacred song, and one was a drinking song. Well, members of the chorus who are Irish were deeply offended that I would stereotype Irish people as drinking people. All right? I don't know if they'd ever been to Ireland before, but anyway. So I asked George Emlyn, a longtime music director of Christmas Revels, what should I do? He said, bring in someone from Ireland and have them do the Irish drinking song. No one will be offended. And it's like, who can tell a Jewish joke? Who can tell a black joke? I can't, all right? And it goes to that whole issue. And so when I do this music from different traditions, I have to be very careful and treat it with tremendous respect, with great humility. I'm talking Aretha Franklin humility, that much humility. I mean, Patricia, last night in rehearsal, how many times did I say the word humility? Like 8 times. And so it's just coming from a humble heart. As a white person, it is so easy. We talk about cultural theft. Andre, I hope you talk about that, because it's a very powerful statement, So I'm going to turn it over to Andre. Can I do that?
Don't pressure.
What do you want me to talk about?
Well, you were talking about the Parthenon and the theft, cultural appropriation.
I think, can I stand? Is it okay? Because I get tired of sitting, so like, I think people, as we've been talking about, musicians have been sharing music for centuries. And that's partly the way in which music is not necessarily yours and mine, but ours, in a sense of the collective humanity. That's certainly the case. But, on the other hand, people who have the power also have the power to steal. So, for example, there was a big plan when the British were ruling India, a big plan to move the Taj Mahal to Britain. Now, they didn't succeed, but they did succeed in taking a lot of its jewels to the UK. And if you go to the British Museum, you'll see how the British, when they were a world power, successfully stole cultural artifacts from different parts of the world. And so when we think about stealing, it's good to understand what the asymmetrical power dynamic, who has the power to steal from whom. I think these are really important things to say. And in other words, who tells whose stories, and in whose voice are those stories being told? I think that's an interesting thing to think about. So, for example, as you may know, there have been so many stories of slavery here that were told through the voices and the words of white slave masters. And it's only recently, just a couple of months ago, that the Smithsonian had this publication of an African-American slave, an African slave, I would say, who was Muslim, who told his story, and it's actually in the original language in Arabic and so on. So this is really interesting, the idea of how we can represent, sometimes misrepresent, steal, share, misappropriate, and so on. It's complicated. I think it's a very slippery slope, and I don't think there is a right and a wrong in this. But if I were to take one thing that was what Nick said was about humility. How might we approach this with humility? How might white people learn to be humble? I think when I first came to this country many years ago, I never thought I'd be able to live here in America, having been in other countries where American supremacy is always something to be nervous about. Now I live here, and I realize that we should be nervous. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because as I said earlier, some of my best friends are white, and but I mean to say we really have to guard ourselves against privilege and supremacy, and we're in a difficult time. We're in the time when the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh was bombed. Not bombed, but it was a site of terrible violence. This is a bad time for us, but it's also a time of hope and opportunity.
I think I'll follow up. I'd like to just start by saying I'm from a much narrower perspective. And even within that narrowness, there's so much borrowing and using, even in sacred spaces, music that is sometimes secular, that has been reappropriated to be sacred. And there are some wonderful examples of that. But I think that one of the things that I'm all about is the music that I do with folks is all about spreading good news. I mean, good news. And the good news is telling people who are captive that they are free, telling people that, you know what, there is somebody that we follow who had a free healthcare program and gave out free food many, many years ago. And so we have something of an edict to try to follow that example, to try to make sure that we visit the imprisoned, that we feed those who are hungry, because our belief systems suggest that at some point we will be accountable for those things that we did and didn't do. So it's all about good news. And just so you can begin to understand where we come from, when I was a child, and I bet when you were a child too, you learned your first gospel song. It's an old song that says, the itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. What good news, what better news could you have than that? If God sends some rain and it washes you out, but God also sends you the sun and it gives you another opportunity to climb again, that's the good news. So when I sing this music, I get very excited because I come out of what is struggle, and struggle to get to a place of relief. Taking my life and whatever obstacles I'm facing and saying there's another way, there's a better way. I look at the fact that I am, can you believe it, a poor little country boy from Mississippi of all places. That's where I was born some 60 years ago, right? And coming out of that, and then to be at Hebrew College in Massachusetts all these years later, talking about something that is so germane to who I am is one of those things I have to say. It's struggle that gets to a place. And when we can come in with a space in our minds of saying, I've been blessed, I am blessed right now, and that is a good reason for me to give praise. That's where my music comes from. So let me just ask you this question, and I'm pretty much done after this. I'm trying to get it all in at one time, folks. How many people in this room right now would say they are blessed? That's beautiful. How many people have ever been through a situation where someone put a needle in your arm, put you to sleep, did surgery on you, put another needle in your arm and woke you back up, and then you're here? Okay, now the first thing that I ask you, okay, just are you blessed? And so are you blessed gives me enough of a reason to want to give praise to God. Just because I'm blessed. God didn't have to do another thing. If God does nothing else for me, I'm already blessed, okay? So that's a good reason to praise. The second one I'm going to just say is a miracle. That is a miracle that someone could actually cut on you, sew you back up, fix you in the process, and then you're okay. That is beautiful. So the music that I sing, the music that we do is all about a good news. And that's where we come from with that. Okay, so thank you. That's what the gospel is, right? Good news. Hey, gospel is good news. Yes.
I'm going to piggyback on what you said. So, my first teaching job after I got out of college was to teach at an elementary school of 100% African American students. To this day, the best job I've ever had. To this day. And so, going back to your question, Joshua, who can do whose music? Who's got the authority? There's so many pieces to the puzzle. How many of you, for example, how many of you here are singers, have sung in choirs? Raise your hand, please. Very good. A good number of people here. So we have to take into consideration, number one, what kind of music we choose from any given culture. What is the purpose we are using that music? In what context are we using that music? Should I choose a piece that is from High Holy Day and just do it in a concert, just for the sake of doing something Jewish? If there is such a thing as Jewish music, right? Should I do a piece that is African in nature from one of the countries in Africa, but it is done as a ceremonial piece, but I'm bringing it to the concert room? Do I have the authority to do that? Do I have the authority to do a piece of music that was done in a concert and bring it to an audience that is there to be entertained, not necessarily to understand the historical values of certain things? So I'm putting a puzzle in your head right now so that you can understand how difficult and how many components we, as people who choose the music to perform, have to have in mind. We also have to have in mind the performer. What is the value for the performer to do any kind of music, whether that's Latino or from Puerto Rico or from Russia or from whatever? It's really important that we give purpose to what we do and give it a purpose in the audience eyes as well. There are lots of people who choose music to have themes, for example. A concert will be, what is your concert's theme?
The fiddle sings.
The fiddle sings, right. So in that context, I'm sure that he would bring music, Nick would bring music that has to do with lots of different parts of the world, but are related perhaps to that theme. And so everything could be done. We do not own anyone's music, and no one owns us. Music is it's just a human expression, right? And the many facets of human expression. So when we talk about what kinds of music we do and what is appropriate or not, I don't think there's any rule. I just think there's considerations to have in mind when choosing music and for what purpose you are choosing that. Is it just going to be to show off? Is it going to be because you're invited to go to a synagogue? Or are you bringing music that is Jewish in nature to a Christian church? I mean, there's just a lot of things that we choose. What makes something ethnic? That word ethnic, I'm not going to even touch it with a 10-foot pole. This is not the right place to define what ethnic is. But I will tell you that there are lots of choirs, ensembles in this country that are primarily comprised by people from the same country or same ethnicity or same social economics or same age group. And so there are lots of reasons why we do ethnic, multicultural, global music. And those reasons are really important because we're dealing with human beings. One of those reasons is because we speak the same language. Another reason could be because we have first-generation people coming from different countries that would like to be part of something bigger than themselves and do not have a place to assimilate. And this is the easiest thing for them to do, such as choirs that we have in Hawaii, choirs that we have in Milwaukee, choirs that we have in California, where people come and belong to something that they feel they can identify with. Not only does it define who they are, but the music eventually breaks the mold of who they are into something else because we're always changing. Society is changing. No matter where we come from, each generation is a little different. And so music has the power to not only bring us together through what we already know, but through ethnic music, let's call it that for now, but also to break the bonds of who we believe our identities are and make that circle a little wider.
When I object to that is when it's done purely for political correctness. You know, I know many cases of school teachers who, the December concert, the parents are insisting that we do a Hanukkah song and they choose some ridiculous dreidel song, and, you know, we're more ashamed by that than if there were no Jewish pieces on the program, and I think that applies to many other ethnicities or racial groups. I'm going to turn to Richard for a minute. In terms of, I'll lead you on to something, but you can do something completely different if you want, because you deal with a traditional repertoire in a liturgical context, and what does that mean for the members of the community in terms of connecting to their heritage and keeping with that repertoire or modernizing it?
Thank you. As everybody else has been talking, there have been a number of threads that I've wanted to, that I've been musing on, and that kind of gives me a way to I think, grab all of them. So first of all, the question of repertoire choice. So, I'm here representing a congregation choir. So we serve in the context of services. So in terms of repertoire choice, the question for me is, what will serve the liturgy? That's not an uncomplicated question, however. And it's, to broaden the circle a bit, so I serve at a Greek Orthodox church, but whether you're talking about Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Orthodox Christianity from the Middle East, Bulgaria, the Caucasus, whatnot, these all roughly follow the same forms and texts. Each one has a different musical idiom that all kind of interrelate after a fashion, but you know, the way each heritage tradition, if we want to call it that, executes it is a little different. And each musical idiom is kind of tailored to that manner of execution. So it would be very, very difficult, although there are communities in this country that do it, to take a piece from the Russian Orthodox tradition and just transplant it into the Greek Orthodox tradition and have everything line up perfectly. That said, even within particular idioms, There is no such thing as pure music, to grab onto another thread that got thrown out there. Within the Greek Orthodox context, you will hear, broadly speaking, two different categories. You will hear reference to Byzantine chant, or the chant tradition, and you will then also hear reference to the choral tradition. Usually these are represented as being a fairly high wall between the two, never the twain shall meet, but it's more complicated than that, because the choral tradition tends to borrow melodies from the chant tradition. The chant tradition itself is not monolithic, nor is it pure, if we want to call it that. The chant tradition, if we want to use this word, its classical form, shows evidence of cultural contact with Ottoman music. And then, there are various layers of reforms and simplifications and re-expansions and so on and so forth. So even within under the umbrella of Byzantine chant, you have to be clear about what you're talking about. Are you talking about the way a certain group of cantors does it now? The way a certain classical ideal that gets taught in the classroom in certain contexts? Are you talking about the way that people emigrate, the way that they're talking about the tradition that people who were not necessarily formally trained but nonetheless absorbed it orally, the way they brought it here from their upbringing on this or that island? These are all different layers that you have to sift through when you're talking about, quote unquote, the chant tradition. And then when you're talking about the choral tradition, there's the choral tradition that is influenced by some element of the chant tradition. Then there is a choral tradition within the Greek Orthodox Church that has nothing to do with the chant tradition.
Richard, I just have to comment.
Yes, please.
I interrupt you, but we should be interrupting each other more, because I invite everybody to take what Richard is saying and apply it to your own tradition. It's like when we had that cantillation conference, we found out that we had so much in common.
Mm-hmm.
Your discussion of traditional chant versus choral music that is based on chant, choral music that is affected by others. So, let's all think about that as Richard is talking about his Greek Orthodox.
Sure. Thank you for interrupting me. Please do it more. And then to move away from pure music a little bit into the idea of who gets to tell whose story, then you have the problem of different waves of immigration from different places, tensions between second, third, fourth generations removed from people who have emigrated here versus people who have recently emigrated here. Then you have the wild card of converts, which is where I fit in. Obviously, Richard Barrett is not a Greek name. They don't get much more English than Richard Barrett. And so then you introduce, and that's where another thread starts to converge, which is the question of language. Language being another variable that you have to sort of throw into the mix here. Whose story is it? But then you have the idea that Christianity, theoretically, even Orthodox Christianity, is in its own way universal. It's a universal message. But all of these different traditions are instantiated in a particular cultural context. So, so enter somebody like me, who has a Western classical music background. I've studied modern Greek, I've studied ancient Greek, I've studied Byzantine chant in Greece. I've studied modern Orthodox choral compositions. Whose story is it my job to tell? Not just as a music leader, but also as a member of the congregation. I had a conversation with a chorister who, my own choir is undergoing a repertoire change right now, which is I'll maybe talk about that when I have the mic another time. But this person was telling me, 30 years ago, you and your family would have felt so welcome here, because I bring my family to the congregation where I serve. He said, we were so American. We sang Christmas carols during the Christmas Eve service. We did this, we did that. And I'll always remember this. Then this person said, and then the boat arrived. In other words, there was another wave of emigration that, from this person's perspective, wanted to roll back a number of the acculturations that had occurred over 2 or 3 generations. Yeah, or something. And what I thought to myself was, well, my response was twofold. There was one thing that I said to this person and one thing that I didn't say to this person. I said, first of all, but we already feel tremendously welcome in this congregation, which is true. Hospitality is one of the classical Hellenic virtues, and I and my family have been blessed to be beneficiaries of that virtue on many, many occasions, and particularly in the context of this community. The other thing that I didn't say, however, was, yes, but in this very, very American parish, every word under your roof would have been in Greek. Again, whose story? Who gets to tell whose story? Whose story is it my job to tell? This community has undergone a very intriguing change in the last few months, and that we've had clergy turnover, and for the very first time in the history of this community, they have a non-Greek priest. You know, they went through the change a few years ago of having a non-Greek cantor. Now they have a non-Greek priest. And my Greek is stronger than his. So there's less Greek coming from the altar, which means there needs to be more Greek coming from me. And then you have in terms of the language issue, it gets interesting because the second and third, fourth generation Greek Americans very, very much want to hear Greek, even acknowledging that Greek language has been a barrier for their children. And it's the recent immigrants who don't have much of a problem with English, but they want it to sound right. They want the music to sound right. So they tend to prefer chant to the choral polyphonic traditions that have emerged. So for me, as somebody who is proficient as a cantor as well as proficient in choral music and who can do both Greek and English, but who also finds himself as the convert cantor and choir director in a fairly Greek-heavy community, I wind up having to be a bridge in multiple directions. It's complicated. Just to say something very briefly about the word ethnic, I had an experience once in a Greek class, a Greek language class in Athens. So the word for national in modern Greek is ethnikos, ethnic, right? There is identity, as it were, between ethnicity and nationality in the language. This was a very difficult concept for the instructor to get across to the American students. It's like, well, because the American students were like, well, but what if you just want to say national, but you're not referring to a particular ethnicity? And it didn't make sense to the students why that doesn't actually work in Greek. And one of my colleagues in the class, at some point, she kind of snapped her fingers and said, "Oh, I understand why this is so difficult for us English-speaking Americans to get this. It's because the people who would have represented the ethnicity where we're from, we got rid of. Out of the mouths of babes." Anyway.
Lynn, it's your turn.
Thank you. When I was first invited to be a part of this panel, I thought, well, some of the things that I'm going to have to say will perhaps sound either too simple or too sophisticated or not culturally sensitive. The first song that I sang was not part of a choir at that moment, but the first public piece that I ever sang was "Jesus Loves Me" at a Black Baptist church in St. Louis. I listened to jazz growing up, I listened to Aretha Franklin. I listened to Harry Belafonte. I listened to Peter and the Wolf. I sang in the Jewish choirs as a kid. I sang in non-Jewish choirs. I didn't know there was a difference, nor did I think that the difference, that the concept of difference even existed for me. I sang music that was moving for me. So when I moved into my adult life as a singer and also as now an artistic director of a chorus, which is located here at Hebrew College and is made up largely, almost entirely, of Jewish members, I still approach that music that I sing and the music that we program from that standpoint, that the music is what matters. Kol Rev sings music by Rollo Dilworth from the Boston Children's Choir. The Imolonji Cantu Choral Society came here from South Africa this fall and taught us all Mandela, which we sang with them, and they educated us and we educated them, but they have an enormous Jewish repertoire that was very moving to hear them sing. We sing with the Seraphim Singers. We've sung with choirs at St. John the Baptist. We've sung with Greek choirs as well from Holy Cross. There is an exchange of music and an exchange of ideas that is based, I would say, really on the music, on the emotional, artistic, expressive qualities of the music. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that as a singer, and as singers and choirs, do we have to sing everything do we have to believe everything that we sing? So when I sang Jesus Loves Me as a 5-year-old, I actually at that moment, I did believe that Jesus loved me, and it wasn't an issue. I sang Bach cantatas, I sing a lot of Christian choral music. I sang the St. John Passion for many years without thinking about the anti-Semitic language that happens in the St. John Gospel and how that's different from the Matthew and from the St. Mark Gospels. I learned a lot about this singing in an Episcopal church. Eventually, I was on a panel at Emmanuel Church talking about the reasons that I understood how I understood the anti-Semitic language in St. John Passion and whether I would sing it or not. The only time I would say I was deeply upset was when I went to a piece that James McMillan wrote for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I don't know if you remember it. And they sang text from a Good Friday text called The Reproaches that was deeply anti-Semitic in that language, and that caused an enormous stir in the chorus and in the community. This is a question that I open up to all of you, is do we have to believe everything that we sing?
Let me follow up on that and maybe turn up the heat a little bit at the same time. I conducted the St. John Passion a number of years ago, but before I did it, I had sessions with my students to say, what does this mean? What's the difference between a Jew and a Judean in terms of the time of Jesus? And I had this kind of out-of-body experience when I was conducting one of the turba, the choruses, the crowds of bloodthirsty Jews calling for the crucifixion of Jesus. It's like that old TV show, You Are There. I mean, I felt I was one of the people in the crowd. 2 other quick stories. When I first started teaching at Northeastern University, I conducted Handel's Messiah, the whole thing. And then I remember after the concert, one of the students came up to me here, Teresa Buckley, I still remember her name, and she said, what's a Jew like you doing conducting a good Christian piece like Handel's Messiah? After I picked my jaw up off the ground, I thought about it, and I said, look, as a performer, we have to be, to a certain extent, actors. We don't necessarily have to totally buy in, But during that time, we have to be like a method actor. But when the piece is over, when the rehearsal's over, when the concert is over, we go back to being who we are. And, you know, I hear this from parents of children in school who are singing Christian-themed music, and they say, I don't want my child doing that. Are you really afraid that your child is going to lose their Judaism because they sing a particular song? Would you not let them go to a museum and see a picture of Mary and Jesus because you're afraid that that's going to change who they are? No, we go back to being who we are. And yet, would somebody who is a devout Christian do a better job conducting Handel's Messiah? Let's say we had the same musical chops. If that person brought something else to it, or on my part, would I be a better conductor of Bloch's Sacred Service, or of Janowski's Sim Shalom, because it's in my blood? And the other story is a number of years ago, I guess all my stories start a number of years ago. This was at an ACDA function, American Choral Directors Association, a local one for the New England region, and there was a session on African American spirituals and gospel music led by Buddy Howard, who was the conductor. He was the choral conductor at the University of New Hampshire, happened to be an African American. And at the end of the session, an old white woman with gray hair, question and answer, how do you feel about white choirs performing African American music? And he looked her in the eye and said, ma'am, how do you feel about me performing Bach? Now, maybe that's a glib answer, because as Andre pointed out, there's the idea of non-equality in terms of cultural appropriation, the stronger and the weaker culture. And is it appropriate? Certainly, he has the right to conduct Bach, but I think you were saying before, right? It's very different for an oppressed person or a person from an oppressed culture to participate in the culture of the oppressor versus the other way around, because who's holding the cards there? So I hope this can get some controversial discussions going. Brother.
Actually, I'm sorry. I woke up this morning and had a full-blown cold, and so you know, I'm just really trying to make it through here. But this is really where it gets interesting for me. Even more interesting, I should say. It's all interesting. I look at the fact that I'm a part of a religious tradition that says evangelize. It says go everywhere and spread this news. It doesn't matter who, just go and say it. So on some level, it's actually exciting when people do gospel music anywhere, and any choir doing gospel music, because we say we got to get that language out there. Now, there's no such thing really as Christian music. There are Christian people, as we've already acknowledged, but then there are Christian lyrics, okay? So those lyrics can come in a variety of forms, and if one of those lyrics captures someone's imagination, and they say, wow, I'd love to do that piece, we say, yeah, I think it's a good thing for you to do that piece. Now, I have to answer yet another question in all of this, because I have to say, even as a gospel singer, not absolutely everything I sing, I believe. And okay, everyone knows that at one point we had what were called the Dark Ages. It had nothing to do with my race, but they were what they call the Dark Ages. And in the Dark Ages, people believed that the world was flat. At some point, there was something called enlightenment. And then people said, oh, the world is round. Now, can you imagine what those people who had been saying the world is flat for all these years, what they were up against to start talking about the world is round? I mean, we're talking people, it was bad news.
Well, look what happened to Galileo. He said, no, the sun doesn't go around.
The heliocentric as opposed to the geocentric model. Absolutely. And so where we are is, as we kind of go along the road, we come to new places of enlightenment. There is yet a move afoot that tries to actually demystify Jesus. And when we say demystify, it says, because there are some things that we have, particularly in the African American tradition. If I get mad at somebody, I can say to them, listen, I haven't always been saved. Which means I've got a little throwback in me, so don't push me because I'm close to the edge, okay? And so with that, I'm kind of giving myself permission to misbehave. And so you can hear someone saying, well, there's nobody as perfect as Jesus. But if I were to demystify and actually humanize Jesus a bit more, then I would see it is really my responsibility to live the best life that I could possibly live. So to talk about living a life that is absolutely pure, like I've got to do this certain thing, I have to say I'm still human, and some of it I am beginning to struggle with, and there are people who right now, I don't know who will hear this. I want them to know that I'm begging your forgiveness, because someone is going to hear this and say, wait a minute, what do you mean you profess Christianity yet you don't believe everything? Well, I believe we're at another age of enlightenment. I think we're learning more and we're doing more. So I still think that this music needs to get out, and I would like to see as many people sing it as possible. But it doesn't feel like I own it. As a matter of fact, when you come to our concert, 1 month to the date from today, June 15th, that is Gospel Night at the Pops. And so you will come to Gospel Night at the Pops and you will see as many white people on stage as you do black people. And although they won't tell you, you will see as many Jews as you see Christians. And so for me, people like the music, and I think that they should do it. And of course, you get a chance to play with world-class orchestra. How bad is that? And people pay tens of dollars to come and hear you. So, it's a thing. So I'm just saying, I don't believe everything. I believe most of it, and I believe the core of it. But I do believe I myself am being enlightened as I continue on my journey.
Josh, can I offer something? In terms of what you were saying about when you have pieces that come out of the Jewish tradition, are you a better conductor who's better suited to those pieces than somebody who isn't? So there's a parallel issue within my musical traditions, which is that pieces like the Rachmaninoff Vigil and other such pieces are kind of gaining traction among Western secular choirs, which provides a number of opportunities for me to be amused by people's church Slavonic. But besides that, with most of these community choirs, you're talking about non-Russian Orthodox singing these pieces, which means they aren't necessarily aware, probably aren't aware, of the very thick liturgical context that pieces like the Rachmaninoff Vigil or Divine Liturgy assume, and assume familiarity with. My solution to that is simply, to the extent possible, to try to be a resource to those choirs and say, let me explain what's going on to you here. So that even if they are going to sing it as a concert piece outside of the faith community or the heritage community or however we want to phrase that, they can at least sing it from an informed perspective. That seems to be the way around that that's realistic in our world anyway. The power differential is different there than it would be in some of the situations you're talking about. But you are talking about pieces that are at some remove from what we might call generic Western Christianity, for a lack of a better way of putting it. However, if we're honest about it, I think most Latin liturgical pieces in this day and age are probably at some remove from the experience of most Christians these days. But be that as it may, being informed about the context seems to be one way around that.
I would say that it's not only one way around it, I would say that it's one way through it. I mean, it's absolutely essential. In the work that I have done and that the choir has done, it's been essential really to have somebody who understands the music in a different way, somebody who understands the music, who has that music more as a source for them, like the Imolonji Cantu Choir or like Seraphim Singers, to come in and explain to us the background so that we have, as you said, context for it. As the same with the Rachmaninoff Vespers, which I've also sung. It requires context. When the BSO and the Tanglewood Festival Chorus did Bernstein's Kaddish Symphony last March, I came in and talked to the choir about, which was almost entirely not Jewish, about what a Kaddish text was. And they were very grateful to understand the liturgical and the cultural meaning of that text. And it was a wonderful experience for me because I got to share with them my understanding of the music through the text. So I really believe that establishing the context and educating, and not in a pedantic way and not in a simple way, but educating the singers and the choir and the audience about the music that they're hearing and performing is maybe it's not the best we can do, but it certainly makes it better.
The preparation for any performer is to get as close as you can to what was going on in the composer's head, right? Historically informed performance. Practice is what it's called. Now, we all think of that when we're performing the music of Bach. Or, what sound ideal did he have in mind? And then the question is, should we do it that way, or should we do it through more of a modern lens? Is it even possible to do that? And I'm saying it's the same thing. You're saying the same thing, that really to get inside the head, we also need to think about what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what was their background, and that can be very helpful. Nick,
Speaking of Rachmaninoff, there's an upcoming performance of
Liturgy St. Joseph's.
sung by Coro Allegro, Boston's LGBTQ plus chorus. And when is that?
June 2nd. Thank you.
June 2nd. Wonderful chorus. I heard their spring concert. Amazing. Amazing. I want to ask you a question. It has to do with this whole authenticity thing. Bach. I mean, I would love to hear Tammy Wynette sing Jesu, Joy of My Man's Desire. That's where my mind is at. I listened to a group called Hindu Grass, okay? And they take Bollywood music from India and they mix it with bluegrass music with a fusion twist. Or a Bulgarian group that mixes Bulgarian with West African funk. That to me is the music that fascinates me. A Navajo group that mixes traditional Navajo music with Celtic music. Okay? That to me I find fascinating. And for me, authenticity is simply a snapshot in time. What is the authentic way to do the Messiah? Do you do the Mendelssohn version? Do you do the Mozart version? Do you do, which version do you do? What's authentic? So for me,
Handel himself has so many different
Handel himself, So my question for you is I don't know, just talk.
Authenticity has only one time in history where it's authentic, which is inside the composer's head. Once that is in paper, anyone is going to interpret that as authentic.
Which is the difference between visual art and musical art.
Yes.
Right? It requires an interpreter.
And, I mean, I've heard this said for many years, but the older I get, the more I understand what it means. I believe I understand what it means. Whatever music was conceptualized for your group, for example, which you're going to have 6 commissions, which is an impressive thing to happen in a concert, that could be the closest thing to the real interpretation of what the composer wanted because of the interaction you have with him, with the proximity, with the all sorts of things that you share and as you talk about this music, as you perform and study this music. Let's put it in another
And
context.
even then, sometimes I think I know better than the composer.
And sometimes the composer said, that's better than what I thought. Many times, well, you're a composer, you know better than that. So, go ahead, Andre.
No, he's a wazoo, that's what he is.
By the way, I want to say to Dennis, if you're having questions about your faith, Unitarian Universalists, we would love to have you join us. We would welcome you any day.
Can I just add? Sorry, I just have to stand because I get tired sitting down. I just want to say, I think the question that Lynn raised is a very interesting question about believing, because that question is only a question that arises here amongst the Western concept. Why? Is because we have adopted the Athenian concept of beauty, right? In other words, music is an artifact. I'll tell you a story from the. Now, I was giving concerts in Malaysia, many concerts there, and I was told, yes, I know, yes, don't do anything religious or Christian and so on, and I always avoided that, but I did handle coronation anthems, right? But there was a hallelujah in there, so I don't know. It's like I thought I looked at it very closely enough, but I hadn't, obviously. So then people said, that they accused me of being a Zionist and of being me a Zionist, But anyway, and accused me of trying to convert them to Christianity. I said you can't be both, really. But anyway, anyway, I said let's bring the protesters, because there was a whole bunch of people actually who were objecting to what I was doing. I said bring them in, let me talk to them. So I did, and they said, so what's going on here? And I said, well, we are doing this music, but we don't necessarily believe what we are singing. And I said, for example, we have a chorus at Boston University, and they could be Jews and Christians and atheists and so on. They may sing, "I believe in one God, the Father Almighty," but they may not actually believe that. And they said, "You would actually say what you don't believe." And I said, "Yes, actually we do." And they said, "Well, we don't." And so I think this is an interesting concept, that the idea that in Western music, the concept is that you can do what you don't believe, right? So just like when Josh says you can just be the actor in this, and then when the piece finishes, you can go back to being yourself, right? That is unacceptable for most cultures in the world, right? For most, we sometimes think that what we do is normal in Western society, and it's normal for us. It's not normal in India, for example. Historically informed practice is just a fashion over the last 40, 50 or so years. Before that, the idea was that you refashioned the music of the past into the present, like Mendelssohn was doing, like Mozart was doing, and so on. And in India, for example, classical music is always reconstituted in the present. Historically informed makes no sense, because you always reconstitute in the present. The other idea is this concept of authenticity. Let's examine that for a second. I cook. I don't ever want to cook authentic Indian music, Indian cooking. I want to mix Indian with Italian or Indian with Mexican and so on. That's how I cook. That's how I want to make music. And who the heck is going to tell me not to, right? I mean, the idea that I can't do it in one way because somebody thinks it shouldn't be done. Well, if you don't want to eat that way, go and eat in another restaurant. I won't invite you for dinner, right? So I'll give you another story. We have this ensemble called Common Ground Voices, which is an Israeli-Palestinian choir. Well, we take an Israeli song, essentially a song in Hebrew. We take a Palestinian song, a song in Arabic. Now we took, because we're based in Jerusalem, we took Yerushalayim, which is a very famous Hebrew song, and Zahrat al-Madain, which is an Arabic song, both about Jerusalem as being home. And what we did is, the idea is that we don't leave any piece intact. We don't let any piece retain its authenticity, but we take it and we fuse them together. So it's no longer an Israeli song and a Palestinian song, it's our song together. So the idea is that we build the intra-choral collaboration in a way that builds the repertoire as our repertoire, not the repertoire of one tradition and then the repertoire of another tradition. So it's a going into a different mindset. I think in the 21st century, this idea of identity politics entering into the musical repertoires is a dangerous way to go. And I want us to get away from that, while at the same time acknowledging the richness of identity within repertoires. I think there's a place for fusing the repertoires into concept of collective choral humanity, if you like.
I'm going to stand up too. So my mind is blown by what he just said. So, but a couple of ideas I wanted to mention as well. And one of them is just the plain idea of time and proximity that we encountered this fall when we were preparing for high holidays and deciding whether or not to do the music of Shlomo Carlebach, who is an amazing songwriter, yes, he's no longer living. But the sad thing about Shlomo Carlebach was that he was an abuser of many women and girls that came into contact with him over his lifetime. Allegedly. Okay. In any case, there's, as you can well imagine, if this isn't already known to you, this conversation about Shlomo Carlebach isn't actually new. In fact, someone in my synagogue choir raised it like 3 years ago and told a story about how when she was in camp with him, the word was, stay away from Shlomo Carlebach, which she did, which was great. She told that story, but it was this year that we had two members of the choir, both happened to be men, who said, I will not sing that. And so it was just an interesting moment of change. The rabbi, Joseph Mesler, weighed in a very beautiful way, not deciding for us what we should do, but weighed in a very beautiful way, and kind of talking about whose song is this? My son and I have sung this song together every Shabbat since he was, he could first make noise. This is our song. It's no longer the composer's song. But I, as the person, and the cantor, Becky Hiddrick, we decided, no, we won't do these songs this year. That doesn't mean that I won't ever do this again, but I think, as some were mentioning, it can be a beautiful opportunity. I mean, that's my personal feeling, I think, is instead of not doing music, that there is the opportunity for education that's so great. And also to stay away from the idea of it has to be done this way in this moment. This is shifting. We're in a very special moment in this country right now where we're learning a lot of things. And I think just to bring back this issue of, yes, it's all music, but the power relationships, we're seeing how much they matter. And that doesn't, all things are not equal, even in music. I love the idea of fusion. Anyway, that's what's on my mind at the moment.
Yeah, some really good ideas.
Just one last thing, if I may, just 20 seconds. There is something called arrangements. And we have great arrangers here, and composers too, but arrangement means that you have taken a piece of folk music or a tune or something that has been done in not traditional but popular music, and you've made an arrangement to it. In other words, you've given it a twist. You took it from its piece of origin, place of origin, and you have made something with it. That in itself proves a point that a piece of music doesn't have to be done exactly the way that someone conceptualized it in the first place. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that in popular music, we don't have this conversation. In jazz, we don't have this conversation. Why are we having it in choral music?
So, first of all, to what Carol has said, and to a certain extent what you said, is the question of ownership. You know, when we talk about cultural appropriation, it assumes that somebody owns a song and somebody else is taking it. I don't think anybody really owns a song, as you pointed out very well in the Carlebach case. And of course, this whole idea of association. If that song is associated with Carlebach, then it gives me the shivers. It's an emotional thing, not necessarily a technical thing. Just a second. In Israel, as many of you know, Wagner has not been played, at least by the Israel Philharmonic, for many years. Wagner was a horrible man and a wonderful composer. Horrible man, wonderful composer. And just one other thing, Jose, about what you said. I think there is a room for historically informed performance practice. I think there is room for, wow, that's what Bach's music really sounded like. There's a wonderful group that's been performing the music of Salomone Rossi. Many of us know that music, and it's a group of 5 men who sing one on a part with the soprano and alto parts being sung by men, which is probably a lot closer to what the music originally sounded like. And it sounds fantastic. Does that mean I will never perform it with a large choir? Of course not. I think it's a big tent. I don't think we should throw away the idea of going back to the original way, but it shouldn't be the only way the music is performed.
It cannot be the only one.
Yeah,
exactly.
I would argue that there are times where you don't own the music. It's called copyright. I don't go into that. Don't get me started on that one. But there are times where there are songs I won't do with my chorus, and I have to mention this. Like there's music from the Jewish worship that I will not do. I believe it belongs in a temple during worship time. I won't do it. There are words. A lot of people outside of the Jewish tradition don't realize that you don't speak the name of Hashem. You don't do that. Most people outside of Judaism don't understand that. And there are certainly like Native American songs that I would never touch, Muslim songs that I would never touch, sacred songs. And so that's just something I just wanted to mention quickly.
Maybe some last words from our panelists before we open it up to the distinguished audience.
If I can say something very quickly about authenticity and then about this idea of fusion. Just on authenticity, I've always said that the thing about authenticity is that if you can fake that, you've got everything. After dabbling a bit in ethnomusicology, I've come to the conclusion that authenticity's primary utility is as a marketing term. But that's a bigger discussion. In terms of what Andre was saying about fusion, I wanted to just offer a brief description of a project that I have been involved with. It's a commission that I was involved in helping to conceive and execute. And when I said that there are multiple musical idioms under the umbrella of the Eastern Orthodox churches, Russian Orthodox music, Greek Orthodox music, so on. But they all theoretically use basically the same texts. So I was involved in a work that took a text that is common to all those traditions, the Psalm 103 or 104, depending on whose Psalter you're looking at. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, thou art very great. It has the celebration of the divinely created order from the very, very big to the very, very small. The key line being, "O Lord, how magnified are your works, in wisdom you have made them all." And it's a long song. And what the idea that was devised for it was, we approached 6 very, very, very different active composers in different idioms of Orthodox music, broadly conceived. And we talked to these 6 composers and said, here's your challenge. Each of you sets a section of this song in your own musical voice, in your own musical idiom, but it still has to sound like a unified piece of music. And so, this was a Byzantine chant composer, a Russian Orthodox choral composer, another Byzantine chant composer, but who was approaching it from a Palestinian point of view, somebody who composed within the choral tradition, somebody who composed within the Georgian tradition. And they all looked at us like we were insane. You want to what? But they accepted the commission. We locked them in a room for 2 days and said, figure out how you're going to do this. And ultimately, they came to the approach that rather than trying to find a fusion of styles, a fusion of musical voices, what they needed to do was take the text itself and the liturgical context as the unifying component, and then do their own thing with it, but just be able to use the text and the liturgical context as sort of the way to hand it off to the next person. And the result is a 40-minute concert piece that's unlike anything I've ever heard. And I may be able to say more about that in a couple of years when we have the recording done. But there's, I suppose in American vernacular, we used to talk about the melting pot, now we talk about the salad bowl or something like that. This was a salad bowl approach, and it worked marvelously.
Before we open this up, I just want to give a concrete example of, and give Andre credit. He wrote this wonderful, if I can use the word, arrangement of a Muslim Sufi chant called Adinu. And in the middle section, he encourages improvisation. And he writes out an improvisation using what I believe is a traditional chant, and then encourages people to superimpose their own. So in Zamir, I think Louise has sung a synagogue chant, which we do simultaneously with a Muslim, and the what's his name, the choir in Jerusalem. The Jerusalem Youth Chorus of, remind me? Micah Handler, yes, thank you. And they have performed this and recorded this with even more participation of the different traditions that these kids come from, both from East and West Jerusalem. So I think that's a wonderful example of fusion and perhaps how music can bring us together. Music is said to be the universal language, but is it really? Because I think we all have different musics, but it is the universal language in the respect that we all make music. Every human being on the globe has music in their culture. So, some thoughts from you all. Yes, Phyllis, would you stand up and speak as loud as you can?
I just want to thank Lynn and you for talking about believing what you sing, or going back to being in school and having to sing a lot of things that you might not necessarily believe in. I told my father, I don't care if it's tra-la-la-la-la, this requiem is beautiful. Because even though I went to schools that were predominantly with Jewish kids, we still sang all the Christmas carols and the masses and the requiem. That was my first exposure to choral music, and I loved it. And you get pushed back in your family, why are you singing all that stuff? Because it's beautiful. And I like the fact that although Josh conducts a Jewish choir, he was also conducting in a secular college, and he recognizes the fact that this music is beautiful music. If you don't take all the words necessarily to heart, I don't know if it's hard for other people to feel the same way, but that's how I feel. That what you said, you don't always have to believe everything you're singing. And I don't, and that's why I love singing all kinds of music. It doesn't really matter to me what it is. I can sing Lou 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 to Corey's record, it's still be beautiful. So.
But Phyllis, when you sing a prayer, do you in a synagogue text, and I know you've studied this also, do you bring the words to it, or is it just the music? In other words, sometimes
Yes,
you might.
That's a hard one for me. When I lead services, like on my holidays,
Yes.
especially if I was in a new place one year, and I said I grapple with that because you're always thinking, what do I sing here? And what page am I on? And when do we come in? And are they going to sing too? And you lose the connection of what you're saying because you're so full of all those other thoughts. It's hard when you lead, I think, to be as into the music. So it depends. I sometimes grapple with that. The belief even.
For me as a cantor,
Yeah.
it's all about expressing the words. The music,
Right.
music expresses the words.
Well, that's why they say you can't put a tune, you can't contrafact a tune to a prayer just because.
Doesn't stop
It has
it.
to go with it has to go with the words.
I prepare teachers to become choral directors. That's my job. And I've had students who have had situations in which they were told by the superintendent that they could not do specific kinds of music because it offended parents, not the students, it's always the parents.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad you said that comment, Andre, because there are faiths that do take everything absolutely literal. And so this value for expressivity, for creativity, for understand other people's beliefs even though we don't necessarily adopt them ourselves is something that we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do.
Anyone else? Joni?
I was interested in what you said about food. I've been a food writer for about 25 years, and one of the things I've looked at is food migration and how especially Jewish food has translated Jews in all over the world. French Jewish food is different from someplace else. So I've also wondered through the years that I've sung with Zamir and then afterward, how has music traveled through the world and how much more intersectionality is there in all these different musical culture, musical ideas and cultures than we really know about, and then how do we play on that to make music as much of a cultural connector as food now is. People who never would have thought about going into an Indian restaurant or a Thai restaurant because they're Jewish or whatever, now do that on a regular basis without thinking about it. So how do we make people embrace all of these different musical things by showing all the richness and the intersectionality, and that it all came from somewhere that touched their lives at some point in some part of something?
There are so many initiatives. I'm going to name about 10, okay? One, there are many conductors and arrangers that are from the United States going to other places around the world, bringing the music not only of American composers, but of other cultures as well. We have a conductor.
I'm not sure that's a very good advertisement, right? Just want to say there's a bit of colonization going on there.
Yes, however, it happens to be, thank you
be
for
careful
saying
about that.
Yes,
It's like Christianity was sort of like, let's take it.
However, there's the other side of that, and I'm so glad you put me back on my toes. The other side of that is that we have conductors from other parts of the world in that exchange who are also coming here and bringing music of their culture through the conductor exchange program as well. So it goes, but it also comes back to some extent. Now, there are many people, we're doing lots of, for ACDA for example, we're bringing, I'm doing a concert next year at the Southern Division in which we are doing a concert of just Latin American music so that students could be more in touch with that kind of music in our own regional conventions and conferences. Why is that important? Because our students only believe that classical music is the most important music and everything else is less. And so this is just one of the ways that we could influence, educate students that there are other musics of the world that are valued and that we need to learn and teach them how to value that music as well.
Except we're doing them within a Western context.
That is
the
true.
choral concert and the choral arrangement
Yes.
is still that filter.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is true.
Which assumes that it's better when it's done that way.
Right.
As opposed to listening.
You got a point. You got a point. You got a point. I am not going to deny it. You have a great point.
Yeah, but again, but why not? You know, why not mix the traditions?
That is a good point. Yeah, and we have different initiatives that are going on now, like the ones that you're doing. You know, with the Voces de la Frontera, other arrangers as well, fusing things into our common culture, right? Music that is happening nowadays. The funny thing is, for example, I go to Mexico, and I go to different Latin American cultures, and I do not only music from gospel tradition or music from Appalachian tradition, but also we do the music that comes from their own countries. And I bring my own choirs so that they can be a part of that, which is something that's happening this semester. So there's different initiatives. I just started with the wrong one.
You know, and I've found when our choir has gone on tour to different countries, and if we sing an arrangement of a song, of a folk song from that country, it doesn't matter if we get the words wrong. It doesn't matter that it's done in a Western context. They are so happy and pleased that we made the effort to do that. And I think that's a cross-cultural connection.
And the other, of course, huge impact on that is technology. I mean, what we all have access to now, what kind of music we can find, even though we still have to be careful and learn about it and choose wisely. There's so much more available to us now.
And the last thing is, this honor choir that I'm doing next semester is very different. Not only are we choosing students from the southern states to come and do Latin music, but I have invited students from different Latin American countries to be a part of that honor choir. Now that changes everything. And that, I think, should be the model.
Mr. Choral has sung quasi-family Africa many times. Do we sound South African? No. But do we know the story? Yes. We know Enoch Santonka. We know the story of how that piece was written. We have brought in the Afrikaan anthem and brought that into it, as they do in South Africa. So whenever one culture does the music of another culture, something new is created. What's important is to tell the story of the original culture and keep that story alive, keep the heart alive. That's what's important. Can I introduce someone that's in the house? Linda Shoemaker's in the back there. A couple weeks ago, I saw her lead at sharing a new song, wonderful chorus that travels around the world, bringing goodwill, doing wonderful job, just creating community wherever they go. And she led a West African song, and it was just amazing, and it was alive, and it was just, the whole room was like, yes, it was powerful. I just wanted everyone say hello to Linda.
I'm happy that you introduced her, because the only reason that because of Josh and because of you sharing a new song brought the Imaloji Kantu choir here to Boston, and it was through our collaboration with you that we were able to have that magnificent day with them. So many thanks to you for the effort that you bring to bring culture and the music of different places to Boston. So thanks.
Okay.
Another example is jazz music. There's nothing more than American than jazz originally, but it's now more popular in Europe than here.
She's saying there's nothing more American than jazz, and then she's pointing out that jazz seems to be more popular in Europe now than in America.
to them. Or, for example, the Roma people, the Gypsies, their past has so much in common with the Black history here in America. And so they apply the jazz music that has the same typical jazz, there is something authentic in that, to their tradition.
Yes.
So it's very flexible in that respect. So it is authentic, but it's applied to many others that have something in common with that.
People can make connections in that way.
And another thing I wanted to say is that I feel, that's okay. Thanks. I feel sometimes in choral music, there's the music and then there are lyrics. And I feel sometimes here in America we are afraid to be non-politically correct, and therefore we avoid learning about the sources of the certain songs, and that kind of bothers me in a way. And in the Jewish tradition also, we sing without really believing the word necessarily. If we are very secular completely, we know it as the tradition. So we belong to the Jewish people as a tradition, but we don't have to believe it, some of us. But incorporated in the music, which is also has some typical elements to it. And if you go to Israeli music, for example, you find some elements of Russian music and of European music of old time, and authentic also. So we shouldn't be afraid to be stepping on someone or doesn't sound politically correct. I think it mutes it, the enjoyment at least, I think. And I sing in a classical course, so I'm enjoying learning the background, why Bach wrote this piece, what was the occasion at the certain church, for example. I think it just enriches our experience.
A few years ago, I had the privilege of working with Joshua Nelson, which I'm sure a lot of people know. And I was so excited about his Adon Olam, Mika Mocha, Lachadodi. And I did those songs in a space, and I wouldn't say it was necessarily criticism that I received, but there was some real question about why you would do this music in a concert type setting. And my hope is that, as I talked about enlightenment, that we're continuing to get enlightened a bit. And when we get to a place where we can really allow others to learn about the music that is created, even if we say it's for our sacred space, and get to do it in other places in order that people can learn, I think that might be a good thing. Now, I say this with the sincere hope that I would never offend anyone with anything, but I learned through the process of doing that. And I was hopeful to share that message with others.
Yeah, you know, I think I've found it many times that, at least in my experience, many synagogue experiences have become secularized. I may not feel something holy going on, but if I can bring holiness into a concert, you know, I can come away from a concert feeling totally elevated and totally spiritual. So I think, you know, that's another hybrid that's going on.
I want to just,
please.
very quickly, as a choral director, I no longer teach good vowels. I teach good emotions. And if the emotion is pure, if you feel the love in your heart, then the vowel will be beautiful. It's a very simple thing.
So I really agree with two of you, Lynn, that is the music, and Nick, that is the heart. And I have an example from Josh, you introduced me to so many years ago. And I fell in love with that piece, absolutely fell in love with that piece. And one of the big memories I have singing that piece is when I was with Zamir in Israel. And I think we stood in the aisles and we sang it on the bus. And so imagine how I felt many years later when I sang in the Masterworks chorale. I think I told you it was Josh. And we performed Bloch's Sacred Service. And it was one of the most moving choral memories that I have of my whole life, because having been brought up understanding how much prejudice there is or can be against Jews, the idea that it was just being universally embraced by this chorus, which was probably 98% non-Jews, because it was gorgeous, will just stay with me forever. And I think that that is the power of music, is to bring us together as people because of what the music itself is.
And it's interesting that you talk about that piece, because the composer, Ernest Bloch, who wrote this piece in the 1930s, was commissioned by Temple Emmanuel of San Francisco to write a setting of the Saturday morning service that could be performed in the liturgy. And about a year into the composing process, he said, this is no longer a service, this is now an oratorio. This is no longer just the property of Jews, this is property of all humankind. And that's just what we were talking about. It's interesting that you make that connection. Robbie.
John, Carol mentioned technology, and I wondered whether you could speak a little bit about a project you had a few months ago or several months ago, where people through technology join as a choir electronically. Could you maybe discuss your experience with that?
Thank you for mentioning that. Part of our 50th anniversary was to create our own virtual choir, like Eric Whitaker had done with his own music. And we wanted to use it as a way of spreading the word of Jewish choral music further out. And so we had 150 singers from 7 different countries submit videos of themselves singing this one particular piece, Hallelujah by Lewandowski. And we had engineers put it together, and they did a fabulous job. You can watch this on the web. If you go to zamir.org, there's a link for you to see that. But yeah, that's another way that the internet can be used to create imagined communities, shall we call it? Imagined communities. Okay, one more comment on that.
I think one of the most important things for all of us, as we talk about this, we're talking about adult singing, is to bring this to children. I don't know how to get it to them because schools have cut arts and music and everything else, but my kids grew up in a Jewish day school, and even though they studied some of this, and I have a son who went to New England Conservatory as a musician, he knows all this, but we need to get this to children, and that's the way to change the culture and make children love all of it, not just their own little niche.
All right, I had asked Andre to perhaps lead us all in some singing, and I know maybe Nick, you want to do that also.
He asked me, and I won't do it perhaps, we're going to do it. What I'm going to ask you to do. Can you indulge me by everybody coming so we can all stand together? Because, like we're saying, it's actually being together that's important, right? So we all came here and we all stood around here, all around here, that nobody was in their row, that we were all together and experienced togetherness for 2 or 3 minutes while we might sing some. We're going to stand on the back, so we can be in a kind of a circle kind of thing that we can all sort of enjoy the sound of each other's voices together. And if you don't sing, just pretend to enjoy it. And we can all be together here, yes. We don't just go far away. So, please Say after me, Tula Cliseo. Tula Cliseo. Tula. Tula. Tula Cliseo. Tula Cliseo. Nala Pasakaya. Nala Pasakaya. Tula Cliseo. Nala Pasakaya. Tula Cliseo. Nala Pasakaya. Tula Cliseo. Nala Pasakaya. Tula Cliseo. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. 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 Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. Even here I am at home. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. And now just be free to harmonize with me and be anywhere you want to be. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Tula Cliseo na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Hey kaya na la pasakaya. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. Be still my heart, be still my heart. Even here I am at home. So I thought this is an appropriate song. I didn't know what I was going to do until, the moment of it. I thought, so this is a song from Joseph Shabalala's song from Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And, during the time of apartheid in South Africa, and he was traveling, and then he thought of, decided being estranged from home. And when he was traveling, he said, be still my heart, even here I am at home. This idea that I think is so important for whether we are Jewish or a displaced person or a refugee, and how important it is for us in this time to create home not only for ourselves but for people who don't have homes.
We have 2 minutes left, and
I just want to add to that. I learned this from Joseph. Right. And the dance is very important. It's got to be it's got to be a means to stop quietly.
Yes.
In other words, during the apartheid years, they weren't allowed to do the traditional Zulu stop. So they stopped quietly so they wouldn't be locked up in jail. So they go like this, and they lift their hands up to God, and they bring the power of God down to earth. And that's part of the dance. And if my heart were better, I'd do the heart version, which is Tunakzionana Pasikaya, Tunakzionana Pasikaya. The dance is in 3 while you're singing in 4.
Well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for coming. And don't forget all the wonderful concerts that we have been advertising this evening.